Welcome, everyone, to tonight's Hookup with Real Estate Masterclass. We're super excited for you to be here. We have a very special guest, Christy Scnhurle, and I will introduce her in just a few minutes. I have a little housekeeping to do. And Stefan, would you mind reading the disclaimer?
Okay, we appreciate you attending the Hookup with Real Estate Masterclass. We are not financial advisors, and the content we provide is strictly for educational purposes and not intended as legal, financial, or investment advice. Remember, participation in this program is at your own discretion. Real estate markets are subject to change and can be dynamic. Hookup with Real Estate and its representatives are not liable for any outcomes resulting from the information provided. Seek professional advice before making any real estate or investment decisions. By attending, you consent to this event being recorded and understand that the internet security is not absolute.
Thank you.
No.
All right. So our mission is to provide aspiring and early real estate investors with exceptional education, skills training, and opportunities to invest in real estate while simultaneously sharing strategies to prevent costly mistakes like those we made early on in our real estate journey. My husband had a meeting tonight, so he couldn't be there. You can read about our journey, which involves 3 different partner challenges in the book, Real Women in Real Estate. It's available on Amazon, or I can send you a signed copy for $15. You can request it here. It's got a lot of interesting lessons learned about partnerships. So if you're thinking about a partner, you might want to read that chapter. Okay, my husband is a New Jersey realtor and a veteran. You can, if you're in this area or looking in this area, his website, kenneth-hook.weichert.com. Okay, we are powered by the Legends community. If you want to increase your knowledge, on Monday nights, they have a free rookie roundtable, which continues the education. So reach out to me if you need any information on that. All right, they have a training session, Legends put together introduction to commercial real estate investing training. It's a deep dive. There's 60 bite-sized video lessons. It was put on by a professional real estate investor. There's an AI tutor. There's a free community of like-minded individuals, and it's a super value. Actually, this is kind of changing. They're moving over to the school, SKOOL community, but for now you can get it here at tinyurl.com/multifamily masterclass. All right. So this is our calendar for 2024. Hard to believe that our year is ending. And what I'm very excited though to have this meeting today. And I do want to let you know that I'll be sending out the 2025 calendar, which I have here, if you want to take a screenshot. Our first meeting will be on January 22nd, but I will send this out, and there are a few exceptions, but for now, let's just stay in 2024. We have 2 ways to connect with us. We have a YouTube channel where the replays will be here, and we also have a Facebook groups /hookup with real estate, which you can join as well. All right, but wait, hold on, I gotta go back before I introduce her. Stefan, would you mind reading the quote of the day?
Yeah. The goal isn't more money. The goal is living life on your terms. Chris Brogan.
I found that quote to be appropriate for Christy's talk. All right, now we get to the good stuff. However, I have to see something after I do the introduction if we are actually recording, because I don't see the record button. So something weird is going on. All right. So Christy Scnhurle is the president of Opal Equity and has an exceptional track record of 15 plus years in the multifamily sector and 10 plus years providing consulting services for multifamily developers, where her expertise lies in reducing construction costs, managing procurement, and creating high-impact renderings and virtual tours. Christy started her real estate career at WNC and Associates, a tax credit syndication firm and a top privately held owner of affordable housing in the U.S. Here she gained 5 years of in-depth experience in acquisitions, underwriting, due diligence, and has participated in nearly 300 million of closed transactions, making her a well-rounded expert in the field. Christy is also co-founder of the REI board, an advisory board that helps accelerate success for multifamily operators. She has an impressive educational background, earning an MBA with honors from the University of Southern California. She also graduated cum laude with a BA in psychology from the University of California, Irvine in 2006. During her undergraduate years, Christy was recognized with multiple leadership awards and served as the president of the Pi Beta Phi fraternity and the Rho Lambda National Leadership Recognition Society. She was also a member of the Beta Gamma Sigma International Honor Society at SoCal. So please help me welcome Christy as she shares her ideas on owning your time, how to master time freedom through real estate. I'm going to stop sharing, introduce Christy, and just hang on one. Oh, yes, it is recording. All right, great. Woohoo! Welcome,
Well,
welcome.
you. Thank you for that introduction, Donna. I appreciate it.
You're
And
welcome.
thank you for having me here tonight and sharing your community with you. I'm excited to be able to meet all these new faces here and spend some time with all of you.
Great. Well, thank you. So I always like to start with the question, how did you get started in real estate?
Yeah. So I got started actually right out of college. I was graduating and I had friends that knew I was looking for a job. I actually had got my bachelor's in psychology, thought I was going to go into, like private practice or something. But towards as I was nearing graduation, I had professors that were advising me against that. They were saying, it's really hard to actually to pursue that type of a career. We recommend that you use, the psychology more as like the behavioral aspects of it in a different way. And so that left me a little lost because here I was, I had pursued, years of this degree, and now the professors, the people who were mentoring me, were giving me other guidance. So I felt lost, but I did have a friend who knew that I was looking for a job, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and reached out because she said, you know what, I'm currently at a work for a syndication firm, which at the time I was like, I don't even know what that means. You're just talking gibberish. And she said, I'm going to be leaving and my position we're hiring. So would you consider it? Because I think you would be a great fit for this. So I was open-minded and I said, sure, I'll come check it out. So anyhow, I ended up interviewing. I ended up really interested in the job. Basically, what a syndication firm is we pulled together passive investors. We worked with institutional level investors. So that's like banks and insurance companies. And they were primarily interested or solely interested with our company on low income housing tax credit properties. So they really want that tax credit because that's a great benefit that you can get. And So I started in the acquisitions department and I spent all 5 years while I was with WNC was the company. While I was with them, I was in the acquisitions department. So that really kind of kick-started everything. It was this sort of happy accident that happened. And I've been within that multifamily and real estate space ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's nothing like making connections for jobs. Uh,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about low income affordable housing and tax credits. So, you know, people new here don't really know what that
Yeah.
means.
Yeah, so it's very, very niche, I will say. But basically, it's one of the programs that is run through at the federal level. So it's something that our government currently funds, and they have an allotment every year that they're putting towards subsidies because really they need to add different subsidies and incentives to build affordable housing. Because if you're developing real estate, if you think about a basic level, it's really hard to offer rents that are really low and be able to manage that as a business, right? So what the government does is they come in and they offer these additional subsidies. There's grants, there are a lot of different programs out there to try to help support so that because you have this kind of I guess you could call it a paradox or something that happens where we need affordable housing, but it's really expensive to try to provide that, right? Because unless you're just completely charitable and you're willing to go, below the line constantly, it's like, how do you make that a business? And that's where the government steps in. So tax credits is one program in which they do that. And it's a very competitive program. They basically have this allotment every year where they give each of the states a certain amount of money that they then are awarding out to the most qualified projects and developers to be able to develop or renovate new affordable housing projects, specifically with tax credits. And so these tax credits are an added incentive where they say, okay, if you develop this new, 100-unit project that you have people who are low income for that area and you're providing them rents to which they can afford, then we will give you this added incentive and we'll pay it out over, 10 years. So each year you would get a piece of that. So passive investors come in and not only are you getting kind of some of the financial returns from that, but really what our firm did and focused on was passing all those tax credits directly to our investors. And that's super valuable especially if you're at the institutional level, you're paying, your tax liability might be really high. Things like tax credits are it's not like a deduction where it's reducing your tax liability. It's literally a credit saying if you owed, let's say $100 in taxes, you have $100 in tax credits. It's literally saying you've already paid. It's 100, you're applying it directly. So it's a really valuable thing that a lot of people see.
Cool. And where were they developing? Was it just in California or where?
No, so throughout the US, we worked, it really depended. Each year we would do a fund and we would roll up, maybe 10 to 15 different multifamily projects within these funds. And we would select them based on several things. Like one is depending on which investors we had that were investing into the fund, they had different requirements. At the time, and it may still be in effect, I'm kind of out of the loop of all that because it's been a while, but at the time there was something called like the Community Reinvestment Act, which said that if you were a company, there were certain dollar amounts you had to like reinvest back into your local communities. So with something, if you think about a bank has a lot of different locations throughout the US, right? So there might be, a small town in Alabama that they have a bank and they still would want to put some money. So the other thing that was great with the tax credit program is that by investing in this way, so they're getting tax credits, but they also are checking a box saying, I'm meeting my CRA requirement, basically, if they had a footprint in those. So sometimes that would come into play. But yeah, a lot of it just had to do with, does it make sense in terms of like, is it a solid deal? We believe in the development. We would take a hard look at the tenants there. Like, is there enough in that community that they need this low income housing at this level, right? Like, are there enough potential rental pools to fill this? Because the compliance is really high for tax credits. Like, you really need to be able to meet all these requirements in order to qualify and to continue to get that year after year. So those were more of the things that we looked at, but it was across the US.
Right. So as part of the acquisitions, they were building a fund first, so they would have investors pooling their money ahead of time, so they knew how much funds they had to purchase land. I'm assuming, were they purchasing land, or what were
No,
they?
so what we would do is we were working with a variety of different developers. So we would basically say, we were building relationships with developers all throughout the US with ones that we knew that specifically targeted affordable housing and that they were applying. So we would find out who's applying for tax credits that's a developer. And they're building relationships with those individuals so that as they're awarded, because not everyone who's applying is actually going to get awarded a tax credit property. And so if they were getting tax credits, then I mean it's a relatively small industry. There's only a handful of players like us at the time that are syndicators that you would partner with. Like it was a very common structure. Like if you're a developer, you're outside of this. You're not part of the firm. You're just doing your development, and one of your strategies is to usually there's additional grants and other things that you're getting to help develop it, so it makes financial sense. But the tax credits is a key piece often. And so then they would go and they would be partnering with different syndication firms that were then bringing the equity piece for the investors who are looking for those tax credits. So we didn't actually have it, like by the time it was hitting us, they were ready to break ground. Like we were basically that final stop of like their loan closing, like they needed to get a construction loan to be able to break ground. That's what our fund was doing. It was like funding that construction loan so they could break ground and get going.
So I'm sure you learned some valuable lessons about the different developers. Some probably worked out better than others. Do you have any stories you want to share?
Oh gosh. I don't know how many stories I have around like what it was like once. So our firm, to give a little context, at the time we were around 150 employees. So our acquisition department is probably 10 to 15 employees on average. And so our role is basically we underwrite, we're confirming all the due diligence that everything meets the investor requirements, that we agree with what the developer is saying, in their underwriting, and doing all of that up until the fund closes. So once the fund closes and we wire and we're providing, our equity to all the developers, it then moves in the company. So then it would go over, and our asset management department, and we had a compliance department. And for a while we had property management as well, but they weren't always involved in every deal, but they would then take over. So a lot of the time there was a huge disconnect. So I didn't always see what happened after acquisitions. Once we had it in our portfolio, it didn't really circle back to me most of the time. So then it would be like focused on the next fund. But
Well,
you
what
did see.
about from the underwriting perspective? Were there things that would automatically be like a red mark that you would say, oh, this is not going to work?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely markets that we would take a look at where a lot of what we did was like reviewing the third party reports and verifying, like there were market rent reports that we would do. So we'd have someone go out and they would survey the local market. What do they think the current rents are? We would also look at what the median income is in there to verify that tenant base. And so usually the red flags had to do with the developers underwriting on the front side. Like maybe their construction budget, they didn't have a big enough contingency, or they had too big of a contingency, or their rent up schedule that they were giving us of how quickly once it was built, they felt like they could lease it, felt aggressive. But I don't think there was anything crazy in that you don't see when you're underwriting anyway with anything else, with, multifamily or any kind of business plan. It's really just kind of verifying what makes sense, trying to understand what's the story. Why do these numbers make sense for this asset, or why don't they? And then verifying with whatever key pieces you can. And that's where the due diligence comes in, like running those third party reports and checking those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, that's important. First step. I know when we got involved in real estate early on, we didn't do due diligence the right way. So kind of got caught out from that. But, it was mostly on the partners as well.
Yeah, and that's where, it's hard. But things like background checks can help, but it doesn't catch everything, right? That only catches the major things.
Yeah, and the market cycle had a lot to do with it also. It
Yeah,
was
I can see
back
that.
in 2008,
Oh, okay.
that
Yeah.
crazy market.
Oh, yeah. No, I was at the syndication firm during that time. So that was a tough couple of years there. Even being over in the multifamily side and outside of the residential, it was still, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. So you worked there for 5 years, all in acquisition, or did you do anything else?
No, I was in acquisitions the whole time. So I started as an assistant, moved up to analyst, then I was doing the underwriting. And so I kind of just stuck, but kept promoting within that department.
So was there any psychology that you had to use there, or did you find it?
Um, I would say the psychology there was really probably more of what most of us experience in like an office setting or if you're working in a company, right? Like a lot of it comes into play with just your relationships and dynamics between management, between other employees and team members and things like that. So it certainly did come into play, but it's more just that like behavioral and people studies, but maybe a little less so. I didn't feel like I applied it a lot with clients unless it was like there were certain, developers you might work with that you would adjust how you communicated with them or something like that. To some extent, like when we were negotiating partnership agreements and terms and things. But yeah.
So aside from doing great due diligence, was there any other like major lesson that you learned in that firm?
Um, Gosh, that's a good question. I think it's interesting because I learned a lot. I learned a lot while I was there because I basically walked in knowing nothing about real estate. And not only was I in real estate, but I was in this like little niche that not many people even know exists of this tax credits. And then it was like just apartment buildings with the multifamily. And um, so I learned a lot and also about legal structure because we dealt with a lot of like forming new entities and we were at like the project level and then we were forming an entity with them at the fund level and you have all these legal documents. So I really do feel like that provided a strong foundation for me later, like doing my own businesses. And now when I review, I'm very familiar with a lot of just the common legal and entity documents and things like that. But I think what I really learned, I didn't know how much I learned until a couple of years ago when it kind of came full circle and I started spending more time in some of these online communities in the multifamily space and looking at it from the perspective of like an operator and passive investors and funds and all of these things that I had, over a decade of a break from. And I realized how quickly I understood so much of it and some of the things I had seen from during my time that I didn't think anything of. All of a sudden, I have new contacts learning about it now or seeing it come into play, like, oh, that's why we did that. Or, oh, yeah, this is, so there were just little things like that. But nothing crazy that I can think of offhand.
Yeah. So mostly they were either creating an LLC or some kind of fund as part of the legal structures that kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting because we actually, most of them were limited partnerships. So it was an LP. And I just
Oh,
recently found this last year for my securities attorney, which was just kind of a funny little nugget. But like he made a comment where he was like, yeah, we still call them like GPs and LPs because you've got your general partner and limited partner, right? When we're talking about like a syndication, for example. Um, and to me, I was like, well, of course we do. That's like what they're called in the entity. However, over the years, so from the time that I worked there to now, it's not as common to do limited partnerships. Like most of the time you're doing LLCs, but in an LLC, it's actually not, you don't have a GP and an LP. So I think it's like something that's pulled from structures that where we used to do a lot of this formation in that way. And over time, we've switched to where we're like, okay, now we're doing a lot more LLCs, but the vocabulary and what that means behind it, even though it doesn't match up with the legal, still applies.
interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Well, thanks for sharing that nugget. So, uh, where did you go from there?
So while I was working there, I was also part-time working on my MBA. And once I finished that, I decided to take a step away from doing that. And I was doing some side consulting projects for my father's firm. He had started a decade earlier. He had started a consulting firm where he was working at the time mostly with the top residential builders. So, like D.R. Horton, Pulte, some of those, like the large national ones. He was doing a lot of consulting projects with them. So I started consulting, like doing some side stuff for him because I'd finished my MBA and he was like, hey, can you do kind of these side things for me? And then eventually it ended up being like I got pulled into that full time. So now for the last decade, I've been working with him. And then our business shifted because around the same time, 2008, it was like literally we had such a full, and I wasn't there at the time, but this was just prior to me coming on. It's like a very full pipeline, like so much business, more than they could even do. And then it was like within 2 days, all of a sudden everything stopped because it was just that was the nature of like the single family home residential market at the time, right? So he starts pivoting. And I don't know how he actually fell into the multifamily, but what he realized that I think it was like some relationships or just talking to people over time, he then shifted what he was doing in the single family space over into multifamily and realized there was this huge opportunity because developers in multifamily are structured very differently than they are from like the single family residential side. And like with these large home builders, they have in-house giant procurement teams. They do all like their supply chain is dialed in, like they have every cent accounted for, like as efficient as you can be. They're very dialed in with the cost of each of these homes. Over in the multifamily space, it's a lot of just like these little boutique firms. And they don't have the same infrastructure to be able to support that. There's a lot of reliance instead of in-house on using just the GC to manage costs and to drive, even like the architect to be like the one who's doing the efficient design. But the reality is that they're not the ones that have the expert in the like actual costs of construction. And so he started consulting there and we really grew from there. I came on and we've been working with multifamily developers for, the last decade that I've been involved with the firm. And our expertise is really in helping to reduce construction costs and how do you design and build efficiently.
That's fantastic. First to be able to pivot like that, then to take your expertise that you learned in a small niche group and
Yeah.
share it with your family. That's your dad. Great. So tell us a little bit more about the consulting that you're doing there, are you still doing it?
Yeah, so I'm still involved with CDK is the name of the company. So yeah, I do still spend my time that way, and I'm involved in a few different things. We have a few different business units now. One of the things that we learned early on, we started providing visualization services for developers because when you're early in development, there's a lot of things that happen quickly, and you have so many approvals over the course of years before you even start construction that usually you're working on. And so, because part of the nature of what we were doing was helping to advise on like what is an efficient, from a cost perspective, an efficient design look like? What could you do with the site plan to plan it more efficiently or to like maximize your revenue by getting some more units on there, but still conforming to all of the other requirements, like your green space and, all of the setbacks and all of these things. And so because we started doing that, we ended up in-house having some capability where we needed to be able to quickly do like some CAD designs or floor plans or whatever. And so what happened over time is that we then grew a business unit for visualization services. So that turned into a full-blown like rendering and virtual tour and videos and all kinds of things that we were able to scale and provide to additional developers outside of just like our consulting services.
So they're virtual before the structure is built, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So basically we create these images so that everyone understands like what will the buildings look like? What will the site look like? And it could be very conceptual. I'm sure you've seen some of those images of buildings before they're done where it's kind of artsy looking, like it looks like it was drawn. So we can do some of that very early on. But really we focus on like the photorealistic versions. So we're taking the actual construction plans and all the information about what materials they currently have specified for that, like what kind of brick, what paint colors, and all of these things, and bring it to life. Like, okay, this is what, according to everything you've told us, this is what it will look like. And so that's a really fun business to be a part of because we get to see, years in advance, like what a lot of these developers are doing and what's going to be coming onto the market. And it's just really cool to see as many times as I've seen it now, hundreds and hundreds of times with all these projects we've worked on. You look at a 2D, drawing of something, and not that I'm the best at reading plans, but I'm familiar enough to get my way through them. And even for me, it's like I look at this and I'm like, okay, I think I kind of know what this is going to look like. And then when my team actually brings it to life and I see it, I'm like, wow, this looks so much different. Every time it's kind of fun to see that transformation. So,
Yeah. Modern technology is pretty amazing nowadays.
yeah.
Renderings and AI pictures. And I was having a conversation with a coworker the other day, and he's like, he has a new Google phone, and he was saying you can just add a boat. He had a picture of a lake. He's like, add a boat. And he said it was like zooming in, and it just looks so realistic. Like you don't even know what's going to be reality in the future anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that's cool. So
Yeah.
somewhere along the line, though, you also started Opal Equity, is it?
Yeah. Opal Equity. So that's in my newest venture. I started that this year. I have two amazing partners that I've worked on other projects with over the last couple of years. And because I've been in the space for so long, there are a lot of people that I knew who've been curious about investing passively into real estate, especially into like a syndication model with, apartments, multifamily, but they felt intimidated because there's so much vocabulary and terminology, and it's a little more intimidating than like, I'm just going to go buy some stocks, right? And so anyhow, I was kind of feeling over the last year or two this increase of like, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but I knew that people wanted this, but they didn't know how to vet an opportunity, to vet the sponsor, to really like understand. And because I was in the space, one, I understand the product and I've underwritten before. And then also with all the networking I've done over the last couple of years, I've built a lot of relationships and with different developers, different operators. So I really had an advantage that most people don't have, where it's like I can have a little bit more of an inside look. And so I was kind of feeling like it's time for me, even though it scared me a little bit, to be like the conduit between like, here are the opportunities and like, here are you, I'm going to connect you with them. It's a gift to be able to do that. But it's also, that's a really heavy responsibility, right? To like take that on and to be like, I'm going to vet this and I believe in this and I'm investing in this and I'm opening up the door so that you could too. And I don't take that lightly. So it took me a while before I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. But part of it was because I knew there was a need, and there were a lot of people that I care about that they've been wanting to do this. And if I didn't finally do it and I care about it this much and I carry that responsibility heavily, it made me nervous. I'm like, how many people are they just going to like not know where to put their money? And then all of a sudden they put it into something and then they lose it, or it was a bad choice, So I really felt like I needed to get out there,
Yeah.
which is where
Probably
Opal
could have
came
used
from.
you many years ago.
Aw.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
those are called your unintended master classes or crash courses in investing, right? When you lose. Like, I didn't know I was paying
Absolutely.
attention. I thought it was an investment.
Turned out to be a master class.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, it happens. But we're on the
Yeah.
other side of that, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Um, so you like to talk about time freedom. So can we just talk a little bit about time freedom versus financial freedom? What are your views on
Yeah.
two? What's different about them? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I really started to care about time freedom. I would say 5 years ago is when I really started to focus. I'm a mom of two boys. So I have a 4-year-old now and a 9-year-old. And I started to realize how quickly time was moving with them and also how consumed I was in that in the motherhood, but also as, working in the family business, I have a lot of ownership within that as like a small business owner. And it became abundantly clear how important systems are and being efficient or being organized so I'm not wasting my time and I can efficiently, we can't truly balance most of the time, but we can choose in the periods of time that we're dedicating to different things how we're spending that time. How focused is it? How intentional is it? How, like, the quality of it. So over the years, I've realized, because I was not someone who was very organized. I was not someone, I don't naturally think in a are you familiar with rocket fuel at all? Have you heard of that book or that concept?
I have heard of it, but maybe you
Okay.
want to explain it for
Yeah.
everyone else.
So rocket fuel, there's like these two common, personality types is probably the wrong description for this, but there's basically like two buckets that people generally sort of fall into. And you're either a visionary, which is like the big ideas, the big dreamer, and all of the things, or the integrator is kind of like the doer, really the processes and like, more of the engineer type mind. And so for me, I've always been very visionary, which is very challenging when you're a small business owner if you don't have the other people that are the doers. So they're kind of the big thinkers of like, here's what the plan, here's what it would look like. And then you've got the integrators that more of like the doers to help execute. So over the years, I had to force myself to become more of like an integrator to bring to life some of the things that, we were trying to do within the company. And so as part of that, I really started to find the things that resonated with me. And I fell deep into like this like productivity thing, which to me, the whole goal was time freedom, right? Like, how do we buy ourselves? And a lot of what we're pursuing in real estate and financial freedom, I don't know about you, but I know for me, really it comes down to time freedom. Like, I want to be able to do what I want, when I want, with who I want, and not be tied down by menial like things, right? Like, you don't want to lose your life having to just be caught up in emails and folding laundry for 24 hours. And so it's like, how do we get away from some of these things and do it efficiently and really save ourselves, like even the smallest things, like how much time do we waste going on scavenger hunts every day through our emails and our phones and our files, right? To get to the things to try to do the work we're doing. So time freedom for me is really about like, let's get rid of the scavenger hunts to the best ability that we can. Let's just be a little smarter and spend the extra 2 seconds when we're doing something to think ahead into the future and stop and say, how do I make this easier for my future self? Is there a way I can name this email subject right now that later, if I need to find it again or anyone else, like we can reference it, that I know what this email is about? How do I create my like own SEO in my when I download a file, instead of leaving it as 1234 XYZ PDF, take the 2 seconds to rename it to something I know so that later if I need to find it or I'm looking for it, now it's like you're just searching, right? So it's things like that that's starting to take into it's a kind of a mindset shift in how you're thinking about things as you're doing them. So that's really where the time freedom to me comes into play, because we can do that in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I do name my emails, like I'm looking at something real estate, it will say real estate dash something, or retirement dash, so that I can find it. Or I do coaching, public speaking, CCC, confident communicator coach. So I can always do a search. I'm more
Yeah.
the engineering type, on that rocket book.
Yeah. So for you, this probably came more easily. For me, it was a forced skill. So now I'm like, you guys, especially my visionary friends, I'm like, this is so important. You blow it off, but it is so important, I promise.
Right. So how can investing in real estate help you get more time freedom?
Yeah. So I think it depends, because I think all real estate investing is not equal. Some will not get you time freedom. You could invest into a single family home that you're managing everything yourself and all of the rentals and changing, the locks and fixing toilets. And that may not necessarily get you time freedom. You might actually spend more time on that. There's also more passive investments where you're going to something like syndication, or into funds of different things, whatever sector of real estate that might be, where then you're putting your money to work, right? And especially with something like multifamily, where the depreciation benefit is massive, you're essentially putting your money to work into a vehicle where a lot of it can be tax-free growth for you. So you're not being taxed because you've got this huge depreciation benefit that's like writing off the earnings that you're having along the way during that syndication. So I think that's where being strategic about where you're putting your money and making sure you're putting it to work can help with the time freedom. Because then once you're getting more of this passive income, you're increasing your income, you have more resources. For example, you hate laundry? Great. Hire a laundry service. Save yourself those hours per week where whatever it is, $100 a week, or I don't know, I'm making up the number, but laundry's off your plate. You now have that time back to yourself and to your family to be able to focus on what matters. So it's things like that to be able to prioritize. Is this something I really need to do? Or am I doing it because I've always done it, or because my family, this was the mindset of the like blue collar, like I work and I do my own things, which is okay. But is that how you want to be spending all of your life? Or do you have more goals beyond that, where if you had a choice, could you move some of that off your plate and then spend more time, quality time with your children, or going on vacations, or doing, a side business that's going to generate more income for your family to be able to build generational wealth. So those are all the things that like you start to evaluate, because time is our most precious resource, in my opinion.
Yeah. Recently I decided that I've got to stop giving my time over to other people scrolling through the phones. And so I have like one day a week that I just put my phone down. I'll just let it run out of battery, and I won't even charge it because I don't want to get into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to give your time over to somebody else, but through real estate investing. So you're thinking more as a passive investor, they can not be involved in the day-to-day, the toilets, termites.
Yeah, I mean,
Whatever.
I think that you can achieve time freedom through more of the financial freedom by being very active in real estate. I do think that's possible, but I think out of the gate, if your goal is to not build time freedom for the future and you want time freedom now, if you're doing it through real estate, passive might be more effective for you, because otherwise you're giving more of your time to this thing right now, right? So it depends on how immediate you want some of the time freedom too. So if it's important for now freedom, then passive is going to give you more of that now freedom than active would, right? Because you're pouring more time into this. But if that's less important, then maybe it's like, okay, in 5 or 10 years, maybe you feel like you can more effectively accelerate that if you are very active in the next 5 years and you're buying yourself that time in 5 years. So it can work either way. It just depends on how immediately or how soon or what your goals are for that time freedom. But for me, it goes beyond real estate, because I think real time free, like so many of us are pursuing it, looking at it only through the financial lens, when really we could just be more efficient, and we could just start looking at what am I doing in my day that I could be more efficient with when I sit down to work, no matter if that's for real estate or I have like a W-2 that's unrelated. How is what I'm doing now? How can I stack things? How can I achieve the things that I want to do through systems or being organized, and buy myself more time, essentially, and
Right.
give myself more time freedom now.
And even as an investor, it's recommended to invest as a passive investor first before you become a general partner. So you invest as a limited partner because you get to watch, you get to see what's happening. You learn.
Mm-hmm.
Is the operator paying? Is there problems, unexpected problems that happen?
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen in terms of some of the challenges with investing or passive investing?
I mean, I would think one of the biggest challenges with passive investing is you don't know what you don't know until you know.
Same
So
with GPs too, right?
exactly, it's all a learning curve. And Yeah, I mean, it's hard because you can think that you're vetting as much as you can or what your capability, or you do all this research to figure out how do I figure out if this is a good deal or a good opportunity or getting advice and doing these things. And it's things may still come up and you might still lose, or you might be like, oh, I wish I hadn't invested with this, or oh, I didn't see this up front. And I don't think there's any avoiding that, even whether you're a GP or an LP, right? Because
Yeah,
even if you're getting in actively and you're a GP, that might happen through the partnerships you're forming. You might have the best intention or do the best vetting with your partners, and then something happens that no one could have predicted, right? And you have different approaches with it. And so I think it's the same as with anything in life, really. It's you have to go into it knowing this is a risk. There's no guarantee. No matter how safe it seems, like I might lose my money. But you know what? I'm also never going to win and get ahead if I'm at like, there's a reason that there's higher returns. And
that's
it's
right.
because you might lose, but a lot of the time you also will win. And so
Yes.
I think just knowing that and being in a position where you're not putting every dollar you have into one investment or into one operator and diversifying in that way, then I mean, I think that's the best that anyone can do, right? And continue to educate yourself and continue to update what your standards are, what's important to you as you go along the way and talk to other people, try to learn from them.
And that's such sound advice. It really is. Because um, I mean, you and I met through LinkedIn, and there's another fella. I don't know. Do you know Brian Briscoe? He's
Um,
also on LinkedIn.
yeah, I've virtually met him on Zoom. I don't know him well, but
Okay.
I have met him, yes.
Yeah. I mean, he has an interesting post recently about, doing all of the due diligence, and still he was, was in a project that lost money because of the cycle, the market cycle. So that is
Mhm.
something very important to consider about
Mhm.
an operator, is if they, were successful only because of the market timing.
Yes. Yeah, because there was a lot of that for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think too, and that's a great point, because you can be a great operator and do a great job, and you could still lose money if the right circumstances hit, right? And I think what stands out from like a good operator and a great operator is when you go through those times, what does the communication look like? How often are you hearing from that operator? What are they telling you? Are they delivering bad news, good news fast and bad news faster and telling you? Or is it radio silence and you don't know what's happening? And the next thing you know, you have a capital call in your inbox,
Yeah.
you know? So I think, yeah, that's probably been a really interesting thing over the last couple of years, and that we'll continue to see is there's a lot of luck and a lot of people, just riding the curtails of a really good market. And now it really takes those strong operators that will start to stand out who's left standing, when we get through all this.
And you have a great mentor also. So do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
I'm sure. Yeah, I was fortunate enough a couple years ago when I started venturing more into like the online networking space. Um, at the time, Vina Jetty, she's the founder of Vive Funds, but she was starting a community. So that's really where I kind of found a home with like people that I related with because, for me, I've spent, gosh, 15 years in a very male dominated space too, between real estate in general and then like the construction development space. There's very few women. And so there was just something about the energy of that group just felt a little bit different than the rooms that I've typically have been in before. And so I came in, into that community and very quickly kind of just developed a relationship with her. We just kind of hit it off the bat from the beginning and have grown closer over the last couple of years. So I've had the opportunity to partner with her on different things, and um, I'm now a leader over in. She has since started a mentorship program, and I'm one of the leaders over in that space for the multi-mastermind community. And yeah, I'm really grateful because like beyond just real estate, I think she's been an amazing mentor for me in terms of just personal development. Like when I first met her, first started going into these like online community Zooms, I was terrified to turn on my camera. You would never see my face. I would never be live. And then when I did, it would just be for a little bit. And then I was like absolutely terrible. Like I hate public speaking. And I was like, there's nothing worse, with those. It's like people fear public speaking more than death, right? And I was like, yeah, me 100%. But she really helped me in that way of like developing that comfort and the confidence and pushing me and recognizing early that I had a lot of knowledge in the industry and value that I didn't quite realize I had because I had just been in it. But especially for people who are new moving into this space, how much I could help them. And that's something I really enjoy. So I also have been able to uncover this like joy of helping to teach and to educate around all of these things and these concepts to people who are newer. And I really enjoy doing that.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Instead of considering it public speaking, if you get nervous, just consider it teaching. The whole different mindset.
Yeah, it does help.
That's great. So I want to open this up and see if anyone else has questions. I've been asking a lot. Anyone? You're on mute, Stefan.
Thank you. Just Christy, just out of curiosity, where are you located?
I'm in Southern California.
What city?
Murrieta, Temecula area.
Okay.
That's where Laura lived.
Right. Your daughter's on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
She used to live there. Yeah.
You said USC, so
Mhm.
I've lived in the San Fernando Valley and for years, so I was just curious. That's all.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right. So
I commuted up there. Well, there was an Orange County campus. Well, there still is for the MBA program. So I did do that for a while because I was living in Orange County at the time, and then commuted for 2 years up to the main campus in LA.
Okay.
all right. So were you just gonna say something, Donna or Christy?
No, if you have a question, go ahead. Then Karen, then Dale. We have a few questions.
All right. So what's the typical turnaround time? How much money what's the return on investment, and what's the typical turnaround time to see the funds?
For like Opal Equity, is that what
Yeah.
asking or for anything?
What would be the best investment, and what would be the return on investment and a turnaround time?
So I will give you a very generic response because it's going to depend
On
who
the
the
particular
sponsor is, what
property.
their business plan is, and all of these things. So I will say, so for example, if you were to invest in something like development, you can expect probably a higher return investing into a new development deal. And the reason is because it's a longer time frame. You're probably not going to expect to get like distributions right away because there isn't cash flow. They have to construct it, they have to lease it up. All of these things have to come into play before the cash flow is there, but the payoff could be good. Um, but it's a higher return because it's a higher risk. Not all of them, depending on when you're investing, like I can tell you being in the development space, maybe like 1 in 10 deals actually make it to the finish line, from the early development all the way through and like through construction. Because a lot of them die on the vine when they go to bid right before they're ready to start ground up construction. Just because the financials no longer make sense, they're too expensive to build. And so as long as like when you're investing in that point in time, what the plan is there a backup? Because I will say, even though that's true, a lot of developers have equity in the land. So I will say there's often like those are the things you would want to understand, like what happens if you can't build this for some reason? Something happens, you can't construct this thing, and my money's coming in before you're starting construction. Then those would be kind of the questions and the things to understand. Because some of them will say, I have so much equity in this land, I could sell it, return all of the capital, and we'll be fine. So those are things to evaluate. But that's the reason you would maybe expect higher returns. Like a new development, maybe you have 20, 25% or plus returns. It might be a longer hold period. It will be longer before you see those distributions, but that's why it matches the risk. Now, and I'm speaking more just to like multifamily because that's a class that I'm more familiar with. Then you might have something like we have an offering that we're raising for right now that's a Class B plus. It's like a 1990s multifamily unit, beautiful asset that's been really well maintained. It shares a property line with a golf course. And it's solid cash flowing, has been the tenant base, like most of the tenants have lived there for almost 4 years. They love it. They're lifestyle based. So they don't have a big risk of like all of a sudden they can't afford to live there anymore. They just are newly retired or close to retirement. They love the location because it's this like very affluent area. So with something like that, it's a very solid investment. The returns are going to be a little bit towards where like the market cycle is right now for those, which it has fallen in the last couple of years. So that's like in the 12 to 15% range, which is still a very good return, but it's a conservative return to match a much more solid conservative opportunity, right? And so for something like that, you might expect like a 3.5, 5, maybe 7 year hold period and distributions depending. So like with what we have, it's a 3.5 to 5 year hold. Quarterly distributions, it's already strong cash flow. So distributions start right away. Other ones, if you have more
What
of
would be the distribution on that?
what would be the distribution on that?
Right.
So what we're estimating right now is it averages out to like a 6 to 7% annual, or the cash on cash for the distributions. Then once there's the actual exit, the returns are 12 to 15%. But
Is that development or is it,
no,
no,
that's
it's an
an
existing
existing, yeah,
multifamily? Okay.
yeah. They have a very solid tenant base. There's very few, like they don't even need to go in and do renovations. It's a family office that's owned it for
Hmm.
the last number of years, and they kept it really well maintained. So really they're just going in and putting washers and dryers in units, adding some fenced yards. So very easy, quick things to execute to boost the cash flow and the appreciation value.
Nice. Thank you.
But then you might have some that are more of like a class B or class C asset where like maybe they don't have, as much occupancy, or maybe they can boost rents up, but they need to do a lot more renovation, right? Like, oh, these are outdated units, but if we change the kitchens and we put in new flooring and we do these things to like make them more modern, then you can pull new tenants in and increase rents. So there are things like that you can look at when you're looking at the spectrum that I'm kind of, saying of like conservative to more risky. So something like that is going to fall a little bit more risky. Not that it's a crazy business plan, as long as the person has experience doing it. But the more that you have to go in and do all these things to get the higher returns out of the property, the more inherent risk is just going to exist there, right? Because there's more room for something to go wrong than if you just go in and buy something that's already working as is. So really, when you're evaluating an opportunity, you should look at not just what are the returns, but what's my personal level of risk that I'm comfortable with. Am I okay putting in, I really want these high returns. I'm okay if it's really risky. I just need to know I might not hit these. But if I hit half of that, or if I hit 65% of that, or 80%, like what's sort of your threshold of where you would still be happy with that? And do you feel confident enough in what the numbers are, how they're underwriting it, how they're looking at the deal, who's running the deal, that you would achieve that? So that's really the bigger question or that should be as a passive investor to decide what to invest in.
That's
And
great advice.
what's the minimum you're looking for?
For ours right now, it's 50,000. And it's what's called a 506C. I don't know how familiar everyone on here is with, the different exemptions that exist when you're putting together something like this, but that means that it's for accredited investors. Um, so that's the other, I guess, minimum requirement is that the person has to be an accredited investor.
Okay. I
Right.
got a funny story if you want to hear it.
Absolutely. If there's time, it's not up to me, I guess. It's Donna's.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
have a few
More
questions. Is it
questions.
quick? All right,
No.
we'll come back to it, Stefan.
All right.
Karen?
I believe that you answered one of my questions, which was what the minimum what the minimum amount was as for an accredited investor, because I assumed that all of yours were accredited investors.
Yeah.
Is there you were describing that the most risk, which was I was shocked to hear your answer about how one in 10 make it to the finish line. I was horrified because I had been part of one of those people that never made it, it didn't make it to the finish line and we lost our entire investment. And that's not
Oh,
fun to
yeah.
experience that. Um, so if the ones that are that the properties that are already in um how long does it usually take before you get distributions from the properties that already have been built? Do you already have people in the properties? When do the distributions come about then?
So that would be something. I feel like I'm a lawyer right now, you guys. I'm just going to say it depends. But it depends
No, it
because it
does.
depends on a few things. Every operator is going to set it up differently to where they feel the most comfortable to, because you have this balance of how fast do we want to get money out the door for distributions? And then do we also want to like build up reserves, or do we already have a lot of cash to build up those reserves? Because the number one thing for an operator should be, is the asset taken care of? Does it have all the cash flow that it needs to be optimized and for us to go in and like hit our goals, implement this business plan, right? So that's number one, is sort of, it's hard to give a generic answer to that because it's really going to depend on what they're doing. If you have an asset that they're saying, we're going to go in and we need to renovate 80% of the units, for example, and they're renovating the units as they become available, you might only have 4 units a month or something, that are being renovated at any given time. So that means four units a month are then, going to be offline for a while. They get renovated, they come back online, they're available, then they're being marketed, they're being hopefully rented out for higher, you have these like lag periods, then it's the next set. So with something like that, you're probably not really going to be seeing distributions, or if you are, it's probably going to be a low amount because their goal is like pushing all of these things to push up the value to get the increase of cash flow that then they're sharing, right?
Right, but what are the questions? The reason that
Mhm.
the questions you just finished talking about this gorgeous place that's fully rented and that is
Mhm.
on a golf course. I would like to
Yeah.
know if I would to go ahead and do something like that with a contractor. How quick would I get distributions? That's
Okay.
that's that type of project
Gotcha. Yeah. So with
because
that
I'm not into
specific,
1 in 10 making it to the finish line. I'll never do that again.
yes. So with that specific investment, because it has such strong cash flow already that we're walking into, because we're taking over the debt is a 2.59% fixed rate. So in this environment where we're at what, 6% plus like
Yeah,
interest rate,
amazing.
yeah, it's able to maintain that strong cash flow. And so in that instance, the operator is confident that distributions will start Q1 of 2025. So, but that's that circumstance. You could also have something strong cash flow that the operator still builds in. They're like, we're going to wait 6 months or a year, and then we'll start paying out distributions. But to me, it's really about evaluating the risk of the opportunity, figuring out if it makes sense for you, and then also looking at the back end. You don't want to put all your eggs into the back end, but really with multifamily, with those, as I'm sure many of you know, it's like most of the play usually is how can we force appreciation, bump up the value. And so you really are getting like at the end, that's where the sweet spot is, right? Like a lot of what you're getting is at the end.
It's like growth and income. So that's the reason
Yeah.
why I already know that it's no different really than certain types of funds for in securities as well. Um,
Yeah.
so I was just wondering because I'm kind of in a situation right now where I thought they were going to be giving distributions right away, but they
Um,
told me no, not for 1 year. I'm like, oh my gosh, come
mm,
on. I can't
Uh,
plan for all of a sudden you're
yeah.
telling me that distributions aren't coming for 1 year when I was anticipating I was going to get distributions.
Yeah.
yeah.
The one place that you can look, and you may have already done this, so this is kind of general information for everybody, But when you're looking at these deals, one, definitely be asking and having these conversations up front. But two, there's these documents that they should have that's like, it's PPM. So that's called a private placement memorandum. And it's really fun reading because it's like 100
So
pages
much fun.
of legal
So much
jargon.
fun.
Okay. But if you go through that, and I know it's painful, but if you look through that, that's where they need to list out all of the risks. What is the plan? You also will find within that document, or you should find if it was properly put together, they should be saying, here's when we expect distributions to start. Now, you will also find that probably most, if not all, are going to also have language in there that say that distributions are not required. And that's a little scary as a passive investor because you're like, oh my gosh, like I thought I was going to get, you said you were expecting them in 9 months, but now you're saying I'm not going to get it at all. But the reason that that language is in there and the reason sometimes an operator will not pay the distributions or it's not required to is because, again, making sure that the asset is number one. If there's not enough cash, like you as an investor or I as an investor, I don't want you to be paying me distributions if you're barely keeping the doors open of this thing, or if like we need to be, our reserves are at zero and, my priority is this asset, right?
Because you're risking the principal, basically. That's just not.
Yes. But this is where, and that's where the relationship with whoever's running this is important so that you can have that open dialogue. And that's why I said, like earlier on, a really phenomenal operator should be very good at communicating, right? And like if you're reaching out, you're trying to understand, like if they're pausing distributions when they thought they'd be giving them to you, you should hopefully be getting a lot of information around why, like what is happening with it and why, what are they doing? What's the plan? How are they turning this around? What went differently, and that might just end up being.
But there always is an issue of what you were saying it from the very beginning. There's always an issue. I don't care if you've got the most fantastic private placement offering you could ever imagine. The way I interpret it and the way you meant it are two different things.
Mhm.
Kind of like a Rashomon. We interpret it one way because we're hoping for that. We're hoping for that thing, and we're not right.
Yeah. And that's where I would say things that help, it doesn't make it better, but things that help is really looking at what's the waterfall, what's the structure of payouts, right? Because you want to see that there's some alignment for the GP for it to perform well. And what I mean by that.
Would you explain to me what you mean by waterfall? I'm not exactly.
Yeah. So the waterfall is basically like you have all the operating income from the property, right? And then you pay expenses. And then you get to what's called NOI, which is your net operating income. The next thing after net operating income is you're paying your debt. And then then that's like when the cash is available to be distributed. And that's what's called a waterfall. And basically the way that it flows, you might have what's called a preferred return. And so if you see a preferred return as part of the things that you can buy into, what that means is that would then be the next piece that's sitting in that capital stack. It's saying like, okay, we paid the debt. Now the first portion of cash that's available after debt is paid, the very first thing has to go to, maybe it's Class A shares at an 8% pref return. So that means the first 8% of cash flow goes and pays those investors first. So even if there's not 8%, there's like 5%, it all goes to them. The GP team isn't getting anything. And then you might have another share class where there's another pref return. Maybe it's a 6%. So it's like, okay, the first 8% goes to this share of investors. The next 6% goes to this. Then after those thresholds have been hit and there's still cash left over, then there's a split. And it's like, okay, it's an 80-20 split or a 70-30 split where 70% of that cash is going to passive investors, 30% is going to the GP team, and they're getting paid. If you're seeing that GPs get paid initially straight out of the gate, and it's like a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split, or even 7-30, then you're like, not to say it's a bad structure, but those are the things to think about when you're like, okay, do I have any protection if it's not performing or distributions aren't paused, because I will say it's not a perfect system, but if you're in a scenario near the GP and you want to get paid, if there's the cash flow to come through, like they're going to be motivated to get the cash flow so that they're getting something in their pocket too, right? So it has to be strong enough to kind of hit through all these things before they're getting paid. So if they're pausing distributions, it means they're also pausing distributions to their pocket, not just to investors. So that's sort of just understanding where does the cash flow, what's it hitting, what are these metrics is really important on the front end. Just again, it's like so that you can evaluate for yourself, does this feel in alignment or am I comfortable with the structure?
It's a great answer. And Karen, so I'm in a couple of properties, one just from a distribution point of view. One is quarterly, one is monthly. The other one's supposed to be monthly, but it's been a year also, and we're still, a lot of people bought at high interest rates thinking that it'd be easy to refinance, and that's our situation. We are currently refinancing a year later. Hopefully when that goes through, we'll start distribution.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of pause distributions in this market for deals that have been going on for the last 18 months or so or longer.
Yeah. All right. I think Dale had her hand up first. Dale, are you there?
I am here. So first, Christy, I just want to say thank you because this has been incredibly informative. So I really appreciate you spending this time with us to share this information this evening. And then the question that I was going to ask, I think eventually got asked by a couple of different people about minimum or like your minimum investment, but I'll ask a different question in that being a passive investor doesn't make you an owner, correct?
So you're an owner in a different way. So technically,
Okay.
technically you have ownership of the asset because the title holding entity includes the LP entity. So basically, it's this complicated structure where you have like, here's this LLC that's buying the property. Then you have, and this is a common, people structure different ways, but here's a common structure. Then you have two more entities that are under that, which are like your GP, who are your active, your sponsors, the operators. Then you have the LPs. And so you're going in and that those two together make up the membership of the entity that bought the property. So technically you do have ownership. That's why you're getting depreciation benefits. That's why you're getting cash flow. However, where you don't have quote unquote like ownership rights would be, you'll notice in the operating agreements, you usually don't have voting rights. You don't have a voice of like management. So that's really helped with the GP team. And again, why it comes back to vet your sponsors, vet the operators, because they're the ones controlling everything. You have limited ability to do things as a passive investor than you do as the general partner.
Okay, thanks for that. Because you mentioned earlier that something about getting an email with a capital request. And I thought, oh, now hold on. If you're not an owner, why are you getting requests for capital, for more capital, I suppose? So thanks for clarifying that.
They need more. Sometimes they need more money. They're buying a rate cap. They're trying to refinance. They don't have enough cash. And they go back to their investors and they say, can you guys put up more money so that we can execute this and save the asset?
Right. So then does that at that point change your investment agreement? Would you then be looking at having different return on your investment, up or down?
So we can. Yeah, it gets really complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it depends on if it's all the same investors, if they bring in new investor, like it can dilute shares or adjust equity percentages because you have more people coming in or you have, so it depends on how it's structured at that point, because there's a lot of different ways they could do it.
And this is why we have lawyers.
Yeah.
Fact.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dale. All right, Jason, I know you are next. Do you have questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been very informative. Yes. I was wondering, I guess an observation first. I've found that a lot of people, when they have bad news, they don't want to go out of their way to deliver it to you. Like they want somebody else to deliver the bad news. If there's bad news to be delivered, they want to be the ones to deliver the good news. And they're quick to do that, if there's an opportunity. So is it common that you'd find somebody that would go and deliver negative news like, hey, there's another problem. Hey, we've got another potential problem. Like you're probably going to want to keep the delivery of the bad news to a minimum. I was wondering what your thoughts on that is, or if,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's it. Did you want to ask your second question too while you had it on right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounded like you said you were working in acquisitions at the previous consulting firm. And I was wondering if you were still doing acquisitions or multifamily acquisitions with Vina Jetty and that group, and if so, like what markets are you looking at? Or have you been a GP? Are you currently an operator right now with multifamily?
Okay. So I'll address your first one first. And I will say, I think it completely depends. Some people are, some people aren't as good about, communicating. So it really just comes down to what that GP team, what they believe in is best, because there is also the balance, like what is it that constitutes bad news that your investor should know everything the second it happens? Maybe it's something that's manageable that in the next couple of weeks you're turning around because it's just like, okay, we have a bad employee here and it's these XYZ happened. It's not like substantially affecting things, but we have a plan in action. We're taking care of it. Like maybe that's something you would decide that you're letting them know is going on just so they're aware. Other people might say like, do they really need to, it's like, do they even care? This is minutia. Like that kind of stuff always happens. And then you just don't. So I think there's something to say like in terms of how much and what constitutes bad news. Now, where like my personal opinion is for a lot of these deals where there's like capital calls and stuff, there should absolutely be communication. Like no matter how bad, it's worse to me if there's zero communication, because even if you don't know what you're going to do, just communicating, like investors know, like especially in this market, that there's issues with, rate caps, that interest rates went up, that a lot of deals are going under because of that, all of these things. So if you're just silent because you're scared or you're figuring out, then that's not a good approach to have with investors, because they deserve to know, like, even if you don't know what you're going to do, like, I know I would prefer to at least know that, like, they're like, hey, we recognize that this is an issue. This is coming up, XYZ are the things we're considering. Those are the people that I would trust more in that market. And going forward, it's kind of like, even if you're telling me, hey, these things happen, we didn't anticipate them. We thought we could have hit these metrics. We're not like, I think where they're underperforming and consistently underperforming, that's where like there should be more communication about what's going on and what they're doing to try to address it and update investors. But there's not a straight answer in terms of like how often do you see that or do you not? Because it's also hard to know behind closed doors like who's doing what, right? I might think on paper a certain person, unless I'm personally invested with them, I don't really know how their investors are being treated. So that's a tough one. And then your other question was, am I a GP or an operator? So that's the piece that I've been exploring over the last couple of years. I am not an active operator in this space, but it's something that is my next step. So because I have a lot of just the general experience and skill sets that I can bring from running a business, from efficiency, from operations, from the acquisitions, underwriting, all those things. That's certainly something that I'm starting to explore. But over the last couple of years, there haven't really been deals. So I did spend in 2023, I think I underwrote like 75 deals. Nothing worked, like it wasn't even close to working. And I just thought, you know what? I've dipped my toes back into underwriting. This is not the market right now that I'm interested in. Like, even if we find something, it's probably like the numbers are just not going to align right now. So I took a step back from actively looking. 2025, I do think, opportunities are opening back up. So I think it's very likely that some will come across my desk, and I have a lot of relationships with people who do have a lot of experience, because that's the other thing. It's in multifamily, you can't just, unless you're going direct to the seller, and not through a brokerage, you have a good relationship. It's very hard to get an asset if you have zero track record in terms of like, here's what I've owned and operated myself. So that's where it's like, it's a team sport. It's about who you're partnering with. So for me, I do have a lot of strong partners I could turn to when the right opportunity comes, because even though I have experience in a lot of things and skills that I'm confident I could move forward and do those things, I would never, my first handful of deals want to do that without very experienced people that I'm standing side by side with that are helping to guide through the pieces that I don't know. So, yeah, so not yet, but hopefully that'll change in the next, year or so.
Yeah, definitely so. Well, very likely that things are going to start moving pretty quickly, and there's going to be a serious transfer. A lot of properties are going to move.
Yeah.
So that you're saying that would be like the more, as far as the bad news, good news communication would be on the asset manager or the asset management team communicating with the LPs, and you might have different LPs that actually care about certain, they want to hear, the play-by-play, and then you have other people that really don't. And I guess you'd have to feel that out depending on the team again.
Yeah. And I would say if that's something is important to you, then make that part of your vetting process up front. Like, how often can I expect to hear about this? Like, even asking questions like, what's gone wrong in your past deals? How did you handle that? What did you communicate to investors? When did you communicate to investors? Those kinds of things can tell you a lot about someone's experience too. And maybe you can't fish it all out because maybe, it's hard to know how complete that story is, and it's going to be biased and on the one side, right? But those, if you ask enough those kind of questions, sometimes you can at least get a vibe, or you can start to uncover the story, or you can start to, once you're doing it with multiple operators and different opportunities, start to learn what to look out for or what's appealing to you.
Right.
Christy, do you have a few extra minutes?
Sure.
Hang out and answer some questions. All right,
Yes.
I am going to stop the recording, but we'll just stay here. And so first of all, thank you everyone for joining tonight. And if I don't have you on the distribution list, please put your email in the chat and I will get you there. It's been another great masterclass, and we thank our special guest, Christy, for being here. And this will be on YouTube at Hook Up with Real Estate, all one word, shortly. All right.